Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wallsend history story. This week I am doing another little video covering a few little tales from Wallsend's past. Now these stories could be about people, buildings, or just things going on in Wallsend at the time. And some stories may be a little longer than others, and they are all from various random years. And a lot of this week's stories are again from what I call fairly recent times. I hope you will find them all interesting. In 1922, an article was printed in the local papers discussing the future use for Wallsend Hall. The idea of using it as a local hospital had been discussed. However, it was said that there was some opposition to the idea. One councillor stated that a badly equipped and badly used hospital would be worse than no hospital at all. And after all, the area was well served by the RVI. The committee who were campaigning for the hospital at the whole idea said they had a good support from Mr. Clothier. He had been involved with the Nursing Association for many years, and it was his opinion that a hospital in Wallsend was very much needed. This, the committee said, was due to his vast experience with the people of the town and their need for something local. However, this still left the issue of the cost of running the hospital, and it was thought that maintaining the building with staff etc. may prove more expensive than the committee thought. However, they planned to continue on in the hope that their idea would be successful. Of course, their main hope was to get support from Sir G.B. Hunter. After all, he had donated the hall to the town of Wallsend for public use, and if he thought it was a good idea, then it was likely that they would get much more support from other councillors. Sir J.B. Hunter always liked the idea of helping the people of Wallsend, but he was also a businessman, and he would always look at the financial side of things before making a decision, but they were hoping that he would be on their side. Of course, we all know the hospital scheme would eventually succeed, and there is another tale about it to come very soon. I was surprised, however, to find that the idea had not been popular from the start. I kind of assumed Wallsend people and the local councillors would have wanted somewhere local to go to if they were sick, as although the RVI was bigger and had been running for quite some time by 1922, it was also quite a long way away for most people of Wallsend to travel to. Not many people had cars, and I would assume that most people would have struggled to get to the town. The next couple of stories date from 1925, and after the success, as said, of the Wallsend Hall Hospital scheme, the opening of what was to be at the time known as Wallsend General Hospital was in full swing. It was said that the matron had taken possession and was now doing 101 different tasks to get everything ready in time for the opening. And on the day of the opening, there would be a parade, some flag sellers, and a whist drive, among other things. Although it has to be said that not many details even are available about the opening day. It was also said that £500 had been raised to help towards the hospital costs. It does feel like everything in Wallsend was something that involved raising funds from the people of the town. Now, I don't know how they managed, as it seems almost every year more and more money was needed. And as most people were on quite low wages, it must have been hard to raise the money. Alderman Thompson, the ex-mayor of Wallsend, was helping with the opening of the new hospital, and it was said that they were very lucky to have him, as everything he turned his hand to was always a great success. As everyone knows, the hospital did go on to be a great success and an asset to the town, and many people of Wallsend were born there, and I remember going there for an x-ray in the not-too-distant past. It was a lot easier to get there than having to travel to Rake Lane or somewhere else, and in some ways I think it would be nice to still have it for small things like x-rays etc. Another story from 1925 relates to Wallsend High Street. A reporter noted that since an increase in the use of cars, the High Street was a dangerous place to be. The police were active in the area and had a good reputation of taking bad drivers to court on a regular basis, so regular that it said almost every week someone was appearing in court on a driving offence. The reporter said they had been in Wallsend High Street on the previous Saturday when one such dangerous driver had completely ignored the police officer controlling the traffic and had drove on, almost knocking a man down who was crossing the road. The driver ended up in court and tried to suggest that his car was more important than the person crossing the road, so he didn't think he needed to stop. He was not named and his fine was not discussed, but I think we can be sure that he would not have got away with his odd defence and would have been found guilty. The reporter ended by saying he would rather cross the road in London than on Wallsend High Street. In 1903, the Newcastle Society of Antiquarians, and you have no idea how worried I was about saying that, considering I fell over a couple of simple words before, as I do have terrible trouble pronouncing words now and again. Anyway, they visited Swanhunter's shipyard to visit the piece of wall that had been found while doing work on the shipyards, in the hope that they would be chosen to build the Mauretania. They were met by Sir J.B. Hunter and Mr. Hudson, who was the secretary of the firm. Mr. Hudson showed them many photos of the wall and explained how it had been discovered. He told them that the firm had known for some 20 years that it was in the area they were about to work on, but its exact location had not been known until they started digging. He said he also believed, after viewing old maps, that the part of the wall they had found was not the actual end of the wall. The old maps, he said, suggested that it went on a further 20 feet towards the river. It was believed that the rest of the wall would have been lost some time ago when the shipyards were built. However, the antiquarians were still very interested to view the part of the wall that had been found, and it was described as a very solid structure made up of large square-shaped stones. Mr. Hudson was described as a very good guide. He was able to talk to the society about the shipyards, explaining in detail how the shoreline had changed over many years, as the river would have been much closer to where they were standing in the past to where it was today. The river, he said, had been changed to make it deeper to allow for the building of larger ships. It was said that Swanhunters intended to save the wall. However, as they put it, it might need to be interfered with in order to complete the works on the yards. There was still a lot to be done, as the sheds had to be replaced and new ones built. And, of course, as most of us know from other videos, the wall was eventually removed and rebuilt, initially in Wallsend Park and later in the Hall grounds. In 1937, an announcement in the local papers about the closure of the school of Biggs's Main appeared. It was stated that the school had been closed for the very last time the previous day. All those who attended the school had been transferred to the Western School, and the headmistress, Miss Alexander, had been sent to the Buddle School, and Miss Bowman, the assistant teacher, had been sent to the Central School. I'm assuming that, as they didn't mention any other teachers, that because it was such a small school, there were only the two teachers there. Biggs's Main had been subject to a closure order similar to a slum clearance, and it was said that by 1937 the village was almost empty and the school was no longer needed. This next story dates to 1961, and it was said that the local shopkeepers in Howden were unhappy about the amount of travelling salespeople in the area, or the people who covered the area selling goods from vans, etc. Mr. Burns, who had a shop at Low Willington Farm Estate, said he felt that now the shops were open in the area, there was no need for these vans to go round the estate 3 or 4 times a week. He said he understood they had been going round for a long time, but it was time they were stopped. Mr. Brown, who had a hardware shop on the estate, agreed, saying these vans do not give a new business chance to get established. They travel round stealing all the trade. They should think of moving elsewhere. Another shopkeeper, who wasn't named, and I can see why, said he wanted these travelling shops banned. He went as far as to say that the people of the area were too lazy to come to his shop and would rather sit at home until the van arrived and buy from them. But they should think on, as these shops had been purpose-built for them to use. Now, I think, as said, we can see why he wasn't named after saying that. He went on to say that he thought the council should step in and stop the vans, otherwise the newly built shops need not be there. Mr. Darrow, who had worked on a travelling shop on the estate for 4 years, had an entirely different view. He said he felt they were entirely entitled to sell on the estate or any other estate, and if people preferred to shop with him, then there was nothing that could be done about it. There was no follow-up for this story, however it seems that some kind of compromise was agreed to, as the shops would continue to be on the estate for many years to come, and travelling shops also continued for quite a few more years as well. And maybe in the end the shopkeepers didn't have much to worry about, as the shops are still there today, but the travelling shops have long since gone. The final story this week comes from 1918, when an article appeared in the local papers regarding the licences for alcohol in the Wallsend area. It was stated that there were 51 current licences, which was around 1 licence per 866 inhabitants of Wallsend. There were 6 registered clubs and 44 music and dancing licences. The magistrates said there had been 187 arrests for drunkenness, which had led to 186 convictions. Only one person clearly got let off. This was apparently 140 less than the figures back in 1916. However, the magistrates said these figures included 26 Wallsend women. The magistrates said that although they were happy with the lower figures for drunken behaviour, they were very unhappy that more women were drinking, and stated that it was down to the licence holders to do something about it and to stop the women from drinking too much. In the final part of the article, it was said that the workmen of Wallsend were unhappy at the opening hours of the local public houses. It would seem that they felt the public house should cater to their needs and not open and close as they saw fit. The magistrates agreed and stated that the licences would be renewed, but only on agreement that the pubs would open at 12 midday until 2:30 p.m, and again from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. I must add here that there was no mention of Sunday opening hours on this. If they did not follow these rules, they could be fined. The licence holders who had been present at the hearing, and I don't think it was entirely everybody, but it was a fairly good group of them, had a very brief discussion, after which they said they would agree to the magistrates' requests for opening hours, and they would also attempt to sell more soft drinks to women. The licences were then granted, and the new rules were in effect immediately. I had to smile a little bit to myself about this story. I wonder how the magistrates would feel about the opening hours of public houses today, or the fact that women drinking is no longer frowned upon. I suspect they would have a lot to say about it all, and not much of it would have been good. They would have most definitely have tried to make the pubs open much shorter hours. I do hope that you have found this week's little roundup of stories interesting. They do cover a few different subjects this week, and I do still find all of these old stories fascinating, and I love finding new little snippets of life in Wallsend in the past. So I do thank you all very much for watching, and I have no idea why this week I seem to manage to make so many mistakes. I'm even doing it now, and why I managed to trip over such simple words and say something entirely different. But anyway, I can't always get it right, but I don't think I've ever got it right. Never mind. Like I say, I do thank you all very much for watching, and I'm going to go away now before I make some more mistakes. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week.